Okay.
So welcome, everybody. We should introduce ourselves because we might have some new people that aren't familiar with Retake Our Democracy. My name is Roxanne Barber. I'm the co-founder of Retake Our Democracy.
And I'm Paul Gibson, the other co-founder of Retake Our Democracy.
And welcome. We're really glad that you could join us tonight.
And so I just wanted to emphasize that I think this is one of the most important races. And it's one of those primaries where there's two great candidates. We're used to being in a position where we pick one candidate real quickly, and it's the progressive that's trying to unseat the moderate or the conservative, or it's the progressive Democrat who is trying to hold a seat against a conservative challenge. That isn't the case tonight. And so we're hoping that the conversation we have today will help people make up their minds on where they want to cast their vote.
And we should always be so lucky to have two fabulous candidates for every position. It makes it harder for sure, but we usually don't have two great choices.
And so one of the things we'll also do is this will be posted on our website, the recording, and we'll probably get a lot more people there viewing the recording there. So with that, why don't you lay out what the format's going to be, Roxanne?
Yeah, well, welcome to Joe Mastis and Zach Quintero. And what we're going to do tonight, we have allocated 90 minutes, right?
Right.
And if we're not going to go over that. If we run short, that's fine. But the way we're going to do this, we're using a webinar format. So we can't see you, but we know you're there. We can see a list of names. Please use the Q&A function to ask a question to either of the panelists or to both. The Q&A is down along the bottom toolbar. If you don't see it, then just hover your cursor down there and it should pop up. You'll see the little icon for Q&A. Please put your questions there. We won't be using the chat for questions, but you are free to get into the chat and make comments or, converse with the other attendees.
And since we're trying to ask questions of both candidates, try to make your question something that would be germane to both candidates, not like, so Joe, tell us about your decision on the Avangrid case, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you can. It
doesn't leave Zach with much to say.
If you can ask a question to both, I think that's preferred, but I think it's okay too if maybe you have a follow-up question about something that one of them said. I think that's fine. So I would suggest though that you might want to wait a little bit because your question could be answered during the course. Paul and I are going to ask I think 7 or 8 questions of both of the candidates. So your question may get answered. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask each of the candidates we're going to give them 4 minutes to introduce themselves, 4 minutes each. And then they'll have 3 minutes each to answer the questions. And of course, you don't have to take all that time if you don't need it.
And we did not share the questions with either of the candidates.
And I'm just going to get out my...
I got my timer right here.
You do? Okay. All right. Paul's going to time.
All right. So we're going to let... who we got going first on the introduction, Roxanne?
I don't know. Which one of you would like to go first?
Neither one.
Oh, I can't.
I can go. That's fine.
Okay. All right. Why don't you go ahead, Joe?
All right. Well, thank you, Retake Our Democracy, for hosting this forum. For everyone listening in, I wish I could see your face, but I'm Joseph Maestas, and I want to be New Mexico's next state auditor. Billions of federal funds will soon flow into our state, and New Mexico needs someone who's experienced and has a proven track record of fighting for the people. And I have that experience. I have that track record. It's a track record of more than 30 years in public service, serving our country as a federal civil servant and working at all levels of the federal government. I've earned both a bachelor's and master's degree in civil engineering, and I'm a licensed professional engineer. But engineering, you might ask, how does that help? Well, as an engineer with the federal government, I've overseen hundreds of project audits, recovered hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal funding, Through corrective actions taken on non-compliant work products, I also learned how to spot when taxpayers face risk. So really, as an engineer, I gained experience in building consensus and solving complex problems. It's a track record as a city councilor of Espanola and later as mayor of Espanola, where I supported labor by helping employees organize into collective bargaining units, where I challenged a single payer health insurance, which would have compromised employees and their families' health care, where I secured a wage hike for city employees during a recession. As mayor, I delivered on full transparency by posting the city's budget online for the first time in the city's history, so community members can see exactly how their tax dollars were being spent. It's a track record as a city councilor of Santa Fe, where I spearheaded a full independent financial audit of capital bond expenditures for city parks, which was conducted under the auspices of the New Mexico State Auditor. And it uncovered a misappropriation of a portion of those bond funds. And it's a track record that I'm building even today as the current chairman of the Public Regulation Commission, where I'm pushing to help make solar energy and broadband services available to all New Mexicans. As the leader of this commission, I'm making decisions with my colleagues that affect all New Mexicans, like utility mergers, coal plant closures, and avoiding summer blackouts. This is the track record I will bring to the Office of State Auditor, along with a well-regarded reputation for honesty, integrity, and independence. So as your state auditor, you can trust me to create a scorecard of key indicators, kind of like a dashboard that will root out fiscal irregularities quickly. You can trust me to modernize the office, to make the best use of limited resources, to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse of public monies. And you can trust me to broaden the office's investigatory authority to crack down on those who trade. Pardon me?
1 minute left, Joe.
Okay, you can trust me to broaden the office's investigatory authority to crack down on those who prey on the most vulnerable among us in adult guardianships. I'm Joseph Maestas, a native New Mexican, raised on a small farm and part of a family of public school teachers and military veterans. If you value experience, integrity, and a proven track record of serving our country and the people of New Mexico, I'm your candidate. I give you my word that I'll be the independent watchdog who will root out fraud, waste, and abuse of taxpayer funds. I'll be the state auditor that New Mexico needs and deserves. I'm Joseph Maestas, candidate for state auditor, and I ask for your support and your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. 4 minutes is a long time.
Well, they have a lot to say.
Okay, you're up next, Zach. Take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Paul and Roxanne. It's great to see you here. Hello, fellow Democrats. Hello, fellow progressives and retake our democracy. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart how happy I am to be here with you tonight and go into nerd mode, as I call it, and be able to talk about detailed policies that are going to empower our people, protect fellow New Mexicans, safeguard our state finances, and make sure that our most vulnerable not only have a voice, but have active laws that protect them in the state office of the state auditor. My name is Zachary Quintero. I am running to fight for you, our people, and our state. And I'm running for this office for two reasons. It's both personal and professional. On the personal side, I saw my grandfather go through a predatory guardianship where his entire VA benefits were wiped out. I saw firsthand from my family and my grandfather's end what it's like to be the victim of a predatory financial scam through the healthcare industry. And that's important to note with this office because it's not just going to examine federal billions of dollars. It's going to do that and more. It's going to be in charge of leading investigations into abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation within the healthcare industry. The 2019 laws that passed that changed this office expanded its authority to protect our most vulnerable. And I'm the proven candidate here that has that track record. I proudly served you as the federal ombudsman for New Mexico, where I was trusted by both the legislature, our families, the governor, and the federal government to be able to investigate abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. I want you to think about that because what does this office do? It investigates abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation, not just of the public's money and being able to root out fraud and abuse early on, but also being able to now have this expanded authority to protect our most vulnerable. So I bring you experience not only in the investigative side, doing it statewide, but being trusted statewide. We have secured a statewide coalition of over 80 Democratic leaders from northern, southern, and central New Mexico that are supporting and endorsing our campaign. And the reason why is they believe in 3 core concepts. They want to protect our most vulnerable. They want to make sure that the future of New Mexico is one of diversity and inclusion on all levels of government. And we need a united coalition to win in 2022. So that's what I'm bringing to you both professionally and personally within this office. The second piece I want to share with you is a little bit more on the detail side. So 3 core ideas I have for this office. The first is building out a dedicated fraud unit to protect folks like my grandfather and folks within the adults with disabilities community and our veterans. To make sure we root out predatory guardianships, we need to go into details. We need to be able to align things like having a special prosecutor and building out administrative codes that protect people within the public sector and hold the private sector and the healthcare industry fully accountable. And that's what I intend to do. And I will go at it with both tenacity, focus, and learning focused patience. That's what's going to take to be able to lead this office. The second piece, I am the only candidate putting forward a plan to audit the fossil fuel industry. And the reason why I put forward that plan is very straightforward. You know, we're facing an unprecedented time in our climate, both here in New Mexico, with droughts and with what's affecting our rural communities, acequias and land grants, everybody included, but also nationally on how we hold ourselves accountable as government and from the private sector for the use of fossil fuel. I will be able to investigate not only the abuse of taxpayer funds from the public sector related to climate change, but also have a reporting requirement to measure the total calculated damage being done to
30
state lands.
seconds, Zach.
Thank you. For venting and flaring, for unplugged wells, for water contamination, and then compare it side by side to our overall investments in renewable energy and climate change programs. The last thing I would like to do and share with you is to be able to have a rural resource officer program and have an equity audit that roots out pay discrimination, gender wage gap, and hate and discrimination in all forms to make sure our money doesn't go towards actors that suppress freedom and identity or gender. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. My name is Zach Quintero. I hope to earn your trust and support to fight for our party and our people.
Okay,
Thank you, Zach.
thank you, Zach.
Okay, so I'm just going to remind everybody, because some people got on a little late. We're using the Q&A function for questions, but I suggest that you wait. Paul and I are going to ask a series of questions to the candidates, and then we'll take questions from attendees. And feel free to use the chat to comment or to communicate with other attendees, but we're not going to monitor the chat for questions. Please use the Q&A. Okay, so I think I'm starting with the
Yes.
first question. And let me see, since Joe went first, we'll have Zach go first on answering this one. Okay, and it's 3 minutes. And we'll give you a 30-second.
Yeah,
Morning.
30-second heads up.
Okay, so there's probably going to be some overlap from your introductions on this, but tell us a little bit about your background and why you're running for state auditor.
Sure.
Oh,
So,
no, wait, was that
Yeah,
that was the
that was the first question.
introduction though? Was that their introduction?
It's number 2 question, so yeah.
Okay, sorry. That was
That's
the
what you just
introduction.
answered.
Okay, so we're gonna go to number 2. Sorry about that. My
Okay.
fault.
What in your background prepares you for serving as state auditor? Zach,
Great.
you're up first.
Thank you, Paul and Roxanne. So my background is very detailed and focused related to the state auditor's office. It's going to be precision-based experience that matters most here. And let me explain what I mean by that. I'm the only candidate professionally trained in law, investigations, and professional-based economics research related to finding and rooting out abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. That's what this office does. I hold a degree in law from the University of New Mexico School of Law. I hold degrees in economics and government from New Mexico State University. And, you know, just a quick shout out, go Aggies. I hope we're winning right now. But the other piece in this, also having a professional background related to economic development, having served actually the same time Mr. Maestas was in city government as an economic development specialist for the city of Santa Fe. I also worked as a Udall scholar and fellow with the U.S. Treasury Department Office of Emergency Programs. This was a program that was designed to be able to develop analytical skills for students in undergraduate levels to identify risks and assessments early on for national security situations. You may ask why I bring this up. When the pandemic hit, we were all in free fall for the first 48 hours. And that kind of experience was incredibly relevant and useful. And I was appointed by the governor to serve on the medical advisory team. That was the statewide team filled with both scientists, emergency planners, and logistics experts. I was with the emergency planning group. My job was to help coordinate federal and state relief to rural areas of our state for pueblos, nations, and tribes, and be able to make sure their hospitals didn't get overwhelmed by making sure they had the right resources and federal finances to support them. I worked alongside some fantastic leaders from the National Guard and being able to support the COVID-19 response. And my efforts there led me to be appointed straight after that to serve as the federal ombudsman for New Mexico. And in that role, my job was to investigate abuse, neglect, and exploitation statewide for our seniors, our adults with disabilities, and our veterans. I did that job very focused and with strong tenacity because of not only my personal background, I shared with you all what happened to my grandfather, but because I knew what was on the line. We had everything from COVID-19 fees being charged to people for moving rooms to criminal neglect and abuse at the same time, while overseeing a statewide investigation team of other state ombudsmen in different regions of New Mexico. That is what is required in this office. You need to be able to not only oversee a team in every corner of the state, but also be able to build out professionally the pipeline of talent we're going to need. And that's what I'm committed to doing by recruiting our best and brightest from our universities here in New Mexico with CPAs, finance, and government majors, pulling them in early to help Acequias and land-grant institutions. So I have a plan for that, and I hope I earn your trust and support to be able to build that out. I'm in it for the long haul. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Joe?
Thank you for the question. My background that qualifies me to be the next state auditor is experience. I don't know what precision level experience is, but I talk about my experience in terms of like years and not months. And so it's both professional experience and experience as an elected official. I bring over 30 years of professional experience working in the federal government, having worked at all levels. I'm a licensed professional engineer, so I don't say I'm an engineer without being licensed and able to practice, and I think that's very important. But I'm really proud of my elected experience. I've been an elected official for almost just over 15 years. 14 have been as a municipal elected official, and currently, as you know, I'm a public regulation commissioner. But the experience that I carry as an elected official is a formal one. So when I take the oath of office, and I've done that 5 times, I assume a fiduciary responsibility, an obligation that's solemn and serious to be a steward and protector of taxpayer money. I think that is directly relevant to the office of the state auditor. Also, I've been a mayor before, and a mayor, as you know, has to form his own executive team. And I think you need to make sure that you surround yourself with the best and brightest. And when I became mayor, I had an executive team, top caliber folks. And that's one of the first things the next state auditor has to do, is make sure that he evaluates especially his exempt staff, the at-will staff. And if there's a need to make changes, there should be changes made to hire the best and brightest. In terms of experience with audits, as I mentioned, I was the only counselor in Santa Fe to raise my hand and say, look, there are improprieties with this capital parks bond issue. And I knew that from looking at how the money was being expended. It was being expended for operational reasons to fund salaries. And so I knew enough from my experience as an elected official and having my name on every single fiscal year audit while I've been an elected official to know that that was an inappropriate expenditure, but I knew that the audit had to be done by a qualified independent entity like the state auditor. And I've also been involved in many special audits and forensic audits, like the McCard report that really pointed to a lot of irregularities at the city of Santa Fe. And so really what this office is about is we can't afford to have someone that really doesn't have enough experience to make those decisions and govern properly. Thank you.
Time. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, next question.
So this is for Joe, right?
Yeah, we'll start with Joe and then we'll go to Zach. Can you tell us what you think the appropriate function of the state auditor's office is, and how you would perform that function.
Yeah, well, yeah, to me, you know, the function of the state auditor's office is really to be the chief protector of public finances. And the only limiting factor, I think, with that office is it's a small office that has about 35 employees. But I believe strongly that its investigatory authority needs to be expanded, because it only has one special audits division. And again, as I said, the staff levels are very limited. So I think it should continue, but the function should change to best utilize those limited resources to work on fraud prevention. You know, you have a mix of bad financial performers and good financial performers. And the good financial performers shouldn't have to deal with all the red tape and pro forma requirements if they're consistently doing well, turning in, you know, positive audits with no recurring findings, no lack of internal controls. But I think the office needs to focus on the poor financial performers and help bring them up as a means to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. Once fraud is uncovered, it's too late. Damage has been done, trust has been lost. And so the office, I think, needs to focus more on fraud prevention to best utilize limited resources. It needs to investigate. It needs to expand its investigatory authority, and it really needs to be proactive in auditing financial reports from guardianships. And right now, the way it is in the law is every single guardianship financial or report is sent to the state auditor, and the state auditor has the discretion to audit whether or not to audit those reports. And if there are problems, red flags associated with a certain guardianship, I think there should be a mandatory audit. If there's a new guardianship that has many assets, I think that's a candidate for a mandatory audit. So I think the function should change in getting a little more serious in auditing a lot of these guardianship
30
financial
seconds,
reports.
Joe. 30 seconds.
And the last thing is there's a government accountability office in that, and it's just an information service. It compiles all the information from all audits and consolidates it in a report. But I think that GAO should be like a federal GAO and be independent and have that investigatory authority. So I'd like to totally convert the GAO from an information service to an investigatory office. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
All right.
Zach?
You're up, Zach. Same question.
Great. Can you repeat the question one more time, please?
Sure. Tell us what your view of the appropriate function of the state auditor's office is and how you would perform that function.
Sure. So the constitutional and statutory responsibility it has is to protect the public's finances, but now it has the expanded authority of being able to protect the public's health and well-being through investigating predatory guardianships and different healthcare scams. You know, for this office, I want to first start by saying it's really essential that we have the right focus and mindset when we're talking about state laws involving this office, especially with the overlapping authority it has in auditing guardianship systems. These are the same things that we mentioned before in our opening statements. You know, having an investigative team that is able to digest these kinds of reports of the thousands, being able to triage them accordingly, not through an arbitrary standard, but through one that's through careful review and consideration, because this is people's lives we're talking about here and their financial health and their physical health that we'll be put in charge of. We got to do it the right way. And that's what I'm committed to doing. And here's how we can do that. So for the state auditor's office, the function for me is to detect, protect, and investigate. Detect, protect, and investigate. My job is to make sure that we have a wide net available first through the preliminary audits that come in, and make sure that we're detecting fraud and abuse before it happens. And we do that by having both surprise rolling audits, performance audits, looking at things like the APS school funding system. We all saw how it was hit by a cyber attack, and also having funds that were misappropriated that ended up going to a legislator. That was 11 years of internal controls that didn't get flagged. These are the kinds of things we need to be able to detect and protect against early. And this is how I would do it: by having a digital infrastructure audit, by having a chief data officer. Of the 5 employees we get to bring on, one of them I want to designate as the chief data officer to do what is called digital stress tests through audits, being able to look at the preparedness of government on taking on ransomware attacks and cyber attacks. That way our private information, our medical information, and our state taxpayer funds don't get stolen overnight or hit and get held ransom. We need to be prepared for that. And the best way to be prepared is proactive in detecting fraud and abuse through that. So that's one of the main functions that I would be bringing to the office. The second piece is empowering our rural communities. So what do I mean by that? Our acequias and land grant institutions and our co-ops and different levels of political subdivisions, a lot of them struggle right
30
now.
seconds.
Because they don't, thank you. They struggle because they don't have a chief financial officer. I want to make sure that we are offering a cost-neutral service through having a designated regional CPA and a person available to answer their compliance questions in real time. So we're able to make sure they don't get fined with a $70,000 fine. That way we lift up all of our communities equally across New Mexico. So those are the functions and those are my ideas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'm up with the next question. And so
Mhm.
Zach will be first here.
There's probably going to be some overlap on some of these questions, so.
Yeah. What have you done in prior roles that offer evidence that you will use the auditor position to hold government and or industry accountable? What does accountability look like to you?
Great question. And it's probably the most fantastic and important question we've received tonight, actually. So my prior work as the federal ombudsman, which was very serious work at the height of the pandemic, again, this was during a national emergency where I was trusted to be able to investigate abuse, neglect, and exploitation statewide, required me to hold the public and private sectors accountable to protecting people in both their financial health and their physical health at their most vulnerable stages of life. And I want to state that again, the accountability factor in that is federal sized. My job was to report to the federal government about the operations of state agencies and the private sector and hold both accountable by being able to issue either fines, by issuing findings like the auditor's office is able to do, by being able to pull out different resources from state government to offer assistance in real time, like an expedited track record to be able to bring criminal neglect cases through the attorney general or district attorney's office, like being able to refer financial fraud cases to the auditor's office. That didn't exist before I was there. We had to be able to build that out. And the reason why we built it out is because in the first week of my job there, I wanted to make sure to look over all the data we had and say who's falling through the cracks and who needs immediate relief right now that is being hit the hardest in this pandemic. And it was our adults with disabilities community. It was our rural communities. And I just wanted to make sure that they had not only a fighter, but a designated process that protects them. So that's the prior experience that I bring related to the office of investigations, of being able to build cases effectively, of being able to find and root out fraud, abuse, and neglect effectively. And that's what I will commit to doing as state auditor, not just in words, but through the details of my plans and what I've done at the height of an emergency. And that's why also over 80 Democratic elected officials trust me. It's why we won the pre-primary convention by 62%.
Thank you, Zach.
Same question. Do you want me to repeat the question, Joe?
No, I'm good. So prior roles of holding government accountable. When I first got elected to the city council in Espanola, my first formal meeting that I had on the agenda was a recommendation by all staff to award a tractor bid to the mayor. My first meeting. And I kind of, my stomach was turning just because of the appearance. Okay. I don't know if anything else that was nefarious behind that, but, and so I raised my hand. I said, look, this is not good. The optics are terrible. And I'm not implying that anything was done illegally, but anyway, by raising my hand by myself, after I'd been admonished by all my colleagues about how the mayor had paid so much money out of his pocket, the mayor relented and retracted his tractor bid. He retracted his tractor bid because I raised the issue about the conflict. Yes, he was going to recuse, but and that's when I knew that it was going to be my job to to hold people accountable, and even the very government that I represent. And I did that in my first meeting as a city councilor. So what other roles have I had in the way of enforcing accountability? As I mentioned in my opening remarks, working for the federal government, I did countless number of audits. And although maybe it wasn't holding the federal government accountable, but it was holding people that were receiving federal funds accountable to ensure that they comply with all the federal requirements. And so I think that is very, very relevant. As I progressed through the city council in Espanola, I realized I was really up against, I think, an unethical administration. And there was another instance where the mayor wanted to have a meeting on tribal land to bypass the Open Meetings Act. And I filed a complaint with the Attorney General, an Open Meetings Act complaint. And the meeting and all the agenda action items that had occurred on tribal land had to be done in an open meeting with real minutes. And so, these are the kinds of stands that I've taken even today as a public regulation commissioner. We are holding utilities accountable. We're holding utilities accountable to ensure that rates are fair, just, and reasonable, and that service is reliable. And this is across the board to help keep the lights on. And so I'm in the accountability business, and that's why I think I'm the most qualified to step in as the next state auditor without any transition or on the job training.
Time. Okay. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. All
You're
right.
up, Roxanne.
So we'll start with you, Joe, on this next question. So typically the auditor responds to, okay, Paul wrote this question, so I hope this is right. The auditor responds to citizen complaints about state or local government, but the auditor can also launch independent audits of government or industry. Have you considered any specific government agencies or industries that you plan to investigate when you become state auditor? And if so, what might that be?
And what might you be investigating specifically?
Yeah. So,
Well,
go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Joe.
Okay, are we starting the clock? All right. All the audits that are conducted under the auspices of the state auditor are independent. There's a pre-certified list of independent public auditors. There's about 70, and I believe it's public information. You can go on the state auditor's website, but it's those auditing firms that conduct the audits, and the entities that are audited actually pay for the audit. So the state auditor does not do that. But there is a function within the state auditor's office to do special audits, for example, of state agencies. One thing I would look at is I would tend to look at new departments that may be established, or agencies that are going to be managing a large amount of federal funds, such as federal infrastructure funds. You want to make sure that they have internal checks and balances. So that would be my focus, and it's got to be strategic and targeted because of the limited resources in that office. I mentioned these guardianships. I think that if there's problems accumulating in a guardianship, I think the state auditor needs to not take a pass on auditing that financial report. It's got to be done. The other thing that I'd like to see done too, in the spirit of fraud, waste, and abuse prevention, is to see what larger agencies that have bigger budgets, if they would establish their own inspector general, their own internal watchdog. I've been a part of governments that have, for example, an internal auditor. And so there's a lot of measures that can be taken before you get to a full-blown, fraud, waste, and abuse case that has potential criminal implications. And so the state auditor can do a lot to help these larger agencies, and that would be my target, to empower themselves by having their own formal internal controls like inspectors general and internal auditors. So I think that's very important. Another thing I'd like to see done is I think we need to market the anonymous fraud, waste, and abuse hotline that exists in the state auditor's office. A lot of people don't know about it. I've been getting a lot of calls about, potential mismanagement of funds in school districts,
30 seconds, Joe.
and I encourage them to use the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. It's not normally used now, but certainly now I would look at those agencies that service the vulnerable, like children, youth, and families, and other agencies who also manage not just state funds but federal funds. So that would be my focus.
Okay, thank you,
Okay.
Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Zach, do you want to hear the question again?
Oh, no, I wrote it down this time. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So yeah, my focus for this office would be as follows: making sure that we build out accountability and transparency with the public's trust, not only for the federal billions of dollars coming in, but for the current state operations we have in outstanding areas. And those outstanding areas to me are three parts: the current spending function that we use as a state, the healthcare industry, and the environment. I mentioned to you in my speech at the beginning, I put forward a climate accountability audit, and that specifically focuses on the fossil fuel industry. It is a specific industry that I would be taking a hard look at with our state land commissioner, Stephanie Garcia-Richard, who we will get reelected. I want to make sure that we have a designated focus in this office to have a full review over the overall climate invested projects that we have for climate change and compare it side by side with the total costs of damage being done for water contamination, venting and flaring of lost revenue, and venting and flaring violations, unplugged wells, as well as soil erosion and damage. I want to be able to calculate that cost for us as taxpayers and compare it to our overall investments in renewable energy and climate change programs to show what actual progress we're making by the science. And we deserve that transparency and accountability because it holds both the fossil fuel industry accountable because they like to self-report, which is a nightmare, and we'll get into that in a second. But also the other piece, which is making sure that when our government issues promises for projects or says it wants to be able to fight climate change, we hold ourselves accountable and we meet the scientific standard to protect both our planet, our land, and our natural resources. That's a specific industry. Going to the focus of what this office can further build out into, I am a little bit hesitant to push out and abdicate responsibilities of the state auditor's office to the state that will be investigating. I don't think it's good to break it up and break up our own responsibilities and say, they can try to do their best on their own and do self-reporting, and that person can be as autonomous as they can. There's inherent conflicts in that, and we've seen it time and time again. When we try to trust with self-reporting, that becomes a nightmare. We've seen it from the fossil fuel industry. We've seen it from the healthcare industry. This office needs to retain its authority and effective investigation tools. And that's by asking for additional resources for more staff, but also investing into the digital.
30 seconds, Zach.
So that's what I would be offering. Those are the focuses I would like to have for specific industries. Key one being making sure we have a designated fraud unit for adults with disabilities, our seniors, and our veterans to make sure they're not being exploited and taken advantage of. And I would do that by having prosecutorial power with a special prosecutor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so I just want to remind everybody who's on the Zoom tonight that we're doing a series of questions. We have 3 questions left, and the 2 candidates have 3 minutes each to answer those. And as soon as we're done with those, we're going to go over to the audience Q&A. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A function to post it, and we're going to take them in the order that they were posted, unless we feel that the question was already answered during the course of this first part.
Right. All right. So this one's for Zach and then Joe. How would you insulate yourself from undue influence from the governor, industry, and the Democratic Party leadership? And can you offer an example of a time when work you were performing encountered institutional opposition to that work, but you persisted despite that opposition?
Sure. Yeah. So to answer the first question, yes, I will be able to do that effectively, ethically, and transparently because I've had to do it before. My job was to report to the federal government about the state of the healthcare industry related to long-term care and abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation for our most vulnerable. I had to investigate both the governor's executive administration, and the private sector simultaneously. So I know how to do that with impartiality, with objectivity. And not only that, I was trained to do that with a professional degree in law. We take multiple mediation and investigation focused for civil rights and making sure that we come to objective findings, not biased findings or half-baked ideas. We need to be able to come through with the details on that. And that's where I'll be able to offer objectivity and neutrality in this office by ensuring the public has not only trust, but faith and trust in government. And that's also why we're supported strong statewide, because people trust my experience, they trust my character, and they trust our vision to unite all of New Mexico and keep it safe. So the second piece, an example of how I've faced internal opposition before. So when I was working actually for the city of Santa Fe, there was a lot of different projects going on from different counselors, from different project leads within the city. One of those projects was focusing on it was called a infrastructure outbuild project for using roads and repurposing money that was supposed to be designated for roads. I said this didn't meet any kind of objective standard. We're not meeting what we need to be doing. We can't repurpose these funds for this specific program. Some people disagreed with me. They disagreed with me, and I still held true to what I was doing. And I, in fact, reported it to both my director, the mayor, and to different city councilors as well. And it didn't get anywhere in the sense of it didn't continue and that shift wasn't done. They didn't shift that money. So I'm happy that I took that stance, and I will gladly take that again. But that's an example on a localized level. I've had to do that within state and federal government as well on issues of racism. I've seen my coworkers face pay discrimination in the federal government. And I spoke out against that publicly. And I challenged it within the room, as uncomfortable as it was. And we needed a state auditor that is going to take that issue seriously, has a plan for it, and will not only be outspoken, but has a designated idea for our people to not only pay equity, but ensure that public money isn't abused and furthered for wage discrimination or hate. So that's what I bring.
Thank you, Zach. On to Joe.
Do you need the question restated?
No, I think I'm fine. So how would I insulate myself from undue influence? I'm the only candidate in this race that has made the transition from being a candidate to governing as an elected official. And I've made that transition 5 times. And it's different. It's very different. You know that when you're a candidate, a lot of people want to help you. Sometimes they have expectations. Sometimes they're innocent, but many times they have ulterior motives. And I think it's important to have that experience in making that transition, to know who you can trust. And obviously, you don't ever want to feel a sense of obligation to anyone when you were a candidate. And that's why I am for undoing Citizen United. There's too much money in politics. And that's why I believe in and have pursued public financing whenever it was available. I was a publicly financed candidate when I ran for city council and won, representing District 2. I pursued public financing as a candidate for the Public Regulation Commission in my latest campaign, and I qualified for public financing. And the beauty is I'm not beholden to anyone, especially to any special interests, because they gave me money. And so I think that's a way to insulate yourself from that undue influence. But the position itself is it's constitutionally enabled. It's really required to be independent. It has the power and authority to audit state agencies. And if there's irregularities that may come out of a state agency audit that warrants a special audit, well, then it has to be done. I think that, as an engineer, ethics is one of the foundations of my profession. And so I take it very seriously. And there's no way I would look away from that. In terms of, how have I persisted in the face of opposition? I mentioned challenging the Espanola mayor's tractor bid as a baby councilor in my first meeting. I challenged the status quo in questioning the expenditure of this capital bond money for city parks. It was being used for salaries. I was the only councilor that stood up and opposed it. When you're going to give me my 30-second notice?
30-second right now.
Okay. And the last thing is that when the city of Santa Fe was facing a $50 million structural budget deficit, I worked on removing subsidies from the water fund to free up additional money for the operational budget to balance the budget. And that was a transaction that was over $100 million, but I stood alone in getting that done.
Time.
Thank you.
Joe? All right, so we're going to start with Joe on this next question. And actually, you covered this a bit in your answer to the last question, but I'm sure you have more thoughts on it. And the question is, can you share your views on campaign financing and how you're funding your campaign? Do you accept industry donations? And if so, how do you prevent undue influence from donors? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, as I mentioned, unfortunately, public financing is not offered for these statewide offices. It is for I think the Supreme Court justice candidates, and that's unfortunate. But I agree that that's part of insulating a candidate from undue influence. I signed a pledge not to accept any money from oil and gas industry or oil and gas PACs. And so I've also signed a commitment for, I believe it was a 26th Amendment to our US Constitution to overturn Citizen United. So I really I believe in public financing. I believe there's just too much money in politics. And I think that's very, very important. I mean, there's other checks and balances. There's a $5,200 donation limit, I think, per person, in this race. And I think that's very, very good. But I think it's the way you carry yourself and who you choose to accept assistance from as well. And I've seen that time and time again, where people have ulterior motives. I mean, I've had people that want certain employees out and they want to help me. And I say, you know what? I'm not going to do your bidding if you help me get elected to, exact revenge on your adversaries. And so I've always managed to steer clear, of that. When I was mayor of Espanola and when I ran, it became apparent that the city was not implementing its campaign finance reporting requirements. And so as soon as I was elected, I strengthened those campaign finance reporting and the accountability on the part of candidates. And so sometimes it's not just about what you do to insulate yourself from undue influence, but it's about what you can do, as a decision maker. We have at the PRC a code of conduct, and it's not just for employees, it is for commissioners. Also, when I was back when I was mayor of Espanola, we didn't have any kind of ethics requirements, and we established a comprehensive ethics ordinance where any complaints would be vetted for legitimacy.
Seconds, Joe.
By a committee, but if they were deemed legitimate, they would go before a city ethics commission, and I'm really proud of that. It was a significant change in the way I think accountability was being expected, especially of elected officials. And so I have a long experience of staying out of trouble and not accepting help and money from special interest. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're up, Zach.
All right, thank you, Paul and Roxanne. So insulating ourselves away from, the financial ties that come with this office is really critical. I've made it a point to make sure that we do not accept any funds from CPA firms that would be subject for review and acceptance for audits. A little fact that folks probably may not know here, 85% of the state auditing functions are contracted out when it comes to auditing. And we hire private CPAs to do that auditing on behalf of the state to carry out different forms of investigations with specialized teams. So I want to make sure that any kind of CPA firm that is interested in doing business with the state auditor's office does not have, an insider access kind of a deal. That's point one. Point two, making sure that we stay free from not only the fossil fuel industry, but the healthcare industry as well, and the folks that I've made it clear that I want to investigate on day one through partnerships with the state, or being able to investigate the state's oversight of them. Making sure that we're not getting an undue influence from either the executive or the private sector has been paramount to us. And that's what's also made, this race really unique. It's one of the races where we have the public trust front and center, where we're able to ask for trust and support. But being able to marshal those resources together, it takes more than pointing to the past. It's got to be able to bring both relevant experience and ideas. And that's what we fuse together. And that's why we have such strong grassroots support statewide. There's a reason why we're the only union endorsed candidate in this race. And the reason why is because they trust our character and our vision to be able to protect workers. And they know that we're going to use this office to protect people. There's a reason why we earned the support of the Democrats I've mentioned from northern, central, and southern New Mexico, and won the pre-primary convention, because they know our character and they know our values. They know we're not going to be a person that is going to offer a pay-to-play deal or look the other way when a contract bid shows up in a local area and say, oh, okay, I know that person, I'm not going to investigate or audit that. I don't have those kinds of ties and attachments in my history. I'm free of that. So you get a fresh perspective with me, and you get a new start. And that's what New Mexicans are looking for in this next election.
Okay, thank you. Didn't need to give you that 30-second warning.
So we're down to our last question. And so as soon as we're done with this last question, we'll go to the participant Q&A.
So
Okay.
Zach is first.
Zach is first. Do you want to ask or do you want me to?
I'll ask it. How would you keep constituents informed about auditor activities?
Absolutely. Okay, so information pieces. And again, this is a critical function of this office. I do want to say, again, that the internal team that does information gathering, they do so much more than information gathering. I feel it's disrespectful to just classify them as that. They pull together reports for investigations to be able to guide investigations with the Attorney General and local district attorneys when they're looking at financial crimes. So it's not just an information service that they offer. For me, when it comes to this office, putting the public's eyes on these reports instead of a 15,000 page PDF is going to be essential. The office is going to need to be modernized and user-friendly. And here's how I intend to do that. I want to have a state and federal tracker for the federal and state money coming in to different projects and initiatives, and be able to identify that quickly by saying, okay, here's the school education funding. We've got $2.8 billion dedicated for this. There's over X amount of school districts available. Which one is your school district? Type in your zip code. You're going to be able to find it right there. Okay, here's the next school board meeting where they're going to be voting on funds related to that. Making that user-friendly and that kind of digital infrastructure isn't so much of a heavy lift as it sounds. It's actually just a full investment of $752,000 for an infrastructure update for the Office of the State Auditor. We use the same national procurement coding system and translate it to the state auditor's office so we can track our spending in real time. And that's super transformational. I want you to think about the next oil and gas conservation report that's going to come out. And that sounds like a strange sentence to say out loud, but when they do contract bidding for leases or with state lands, you're going to get a notice about it. You'll be able to find it in real time and say, this is state land, this is state money. I want to know how it's being used. So I'll have those federal and state trackers in place to safeguard our state dollars and federal dollars coming in, but also make things openly transparent through the digital portal. The second piece of this is there's a very old law related to the state auditor's office that a lot of folks don't know. We're required, and it's not so much enforceable anymore, but we're required to travel to all 33 counties in 1 year. So this office has to go on the road, and this office has to bring the office to the people. And that's what this campaign has been about for me. I know it sounds a little bit cheesy, but we traveled over 11,800 miles in the red Chili Prius to over 28 counties. And the reason why we've been able to have such a strong voice and presence is because we're bringing the office to the people. We're bringing the ideas to the people and listening carefully to what they're facing on the ground. I feel that makes the office super accessible. It makes sure that we're holding office hours in each of the 33 counties and making sure that people know not only what's happening, but what are they experiencing and what can we immediately help out on. Those are the two functions that I'd be able to help out on immediately.
Okay, thank
Great.
you. You're
Thank
up,
you, Zach.
Joe.
Thank you for the question. I'm the only candidate in this race that has actually had constituents as an elected official, but throughout my experience, I know how important it is to keep them informed and be transparent. As I mentioned in my introductory remarks, I was the first mayor to ever post the budget online. You know what else I did? The local newspaper, was kind of critical, maybe a bit subjective of the city. And so what I decided to do is I created a workstation, not a laptop, a desktop computer, and we established a public file of all email communications that were not related to legal issues or personnel issues. And so every single communication went into a public folder on the city server. But we had to put a little symbol to designate communications that were not subject to public review, like personnel issues or legal issues. That had never been done. So any member of the media could come in, log on, and peruse any emails at any time from anyone. So right off the bat, I think that gives you an idea of how serious I feel keeping constituents informed of what you're doing and being transparent. I think other things in the way of maybe opening up the office, I like the at-risk list of public entities that have had problems with their audits. Tim Keller set that up, and I think it's on the state auditor website. I think that's a really good tool to let people know, what subdivisions of government are having problems with their loan, with their audit. The other thing is I think the auditor needs to be attuned to what's going on out there. I think if you look at the Otero County election audit, there was, allegations of voter intimidation, and to Brian Colon's credit, he's going to step in there and conduct an audit. So I think part of keeping constituents informed is being proactive and not reactive. And so I think that the next state auditor needs to foresee these issues and determine when it's best to intervene, because
30 seconds, Joe.
if you intervene after you're receiving so much pressure, it's too late. And so that's why I think it's important for the next state auditor to establish a dashboard and monitor how things are going with respect to the expenditure of not just federal but state funds. And so it's good to be proactive and to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on. Thank you.
Time.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move to the Q&A, and we have 8 or 9 questions. One's a comment so far that I can see. I was just asking Paul, what if we give you about 1.5 minutes? That way we won't take any more than 3 minutes per question. We might be able to get all of them in, assuming that there are none that haven't already been answered. So I think you can probably say a lot in 1.5 minutes. So let's try that.
Let's start with Leroy.
Yeah, the first one I think maybe Clifton maybe is a little confusing, because that looks much more like a PRC question than an auditor question, because it has to do with net metering and credits and P&M. So I think unfortunately we're going to have to skip that one, because it's not really a question for other candidates. So we'll move to Leroy Pacheco, and his question is, how would you have investigated the APS failure to know of Stapleton's fraud? And let me see, I guess we start with Joe, because Joe
Right.
just ended. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, APS, Albuquerque Public Service, it's a very large organization, and I know there's been several legislative attempts to break it up, but I think that because of its size and its bureaucracy, sometimes somebody can find a nice silo and be able to do this, to engage in embezzlement and financial mismanagement. And so that's why I believe that these large agencies need to be assessed comprehensively. What do you have in place to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse? Do you have an internal auditor? Do you have an independent inspector general, like the city of Albuquerque, like the New Mexico Department of Transportation? And so big agencies like APS need to have their own internal controls. They need to have checks and balances. And I think, you need to simulate, how an invoice would be processed, even in an agency like APS, to ensure that you do have checks and balances. And so that's what I'd work on prevention, and I'd make sure that there's, permanent changes in place to prevent anything like that from ever happening again. Thank you.
Okay. Joe, did you hear me? Because to give you the 30 seconds.
I think we might have been muted. Sorry, but you were good. You got it in perfect.
All right, thank you.
88 seconds. Zach.
Right, so the APS issue, two core things with that. The first is, again, internal controls failed. It was not noticed for over 11 years. That's the issue. The solution here is twofold. First thing I would be able to look at as state auditor is looking at what I described as a cyber infrastructure audit. By that, being able to do a full sweep of the overall outgoing expenses within the Albuquerque public school system and look at the reoccurring amount. Amounts are key. And this is really critical to know if we're going to be running for state auditor. The patterns and practice of fraud is something that cannot be learned on day one. You have to be professionally trained in it, and I am. And this is where it's really important. The reoccurring amount was almost identical each time, and then structured out in 3 fractured ways. So that is a clear sign of not only fraud, it is also a sign of a continuous pattern and practice towards one company. That should have caught all the red flags for an internal control immediately. So a cyber digital audit right there would have caught the reoccurring expenses for that specific amount to the cent, and then say, okay, what is the vendor this is going to? How can we be able to identify if this vendor is indeed using the services? That's where we do a random audit immediately to be able to say, okay, let's see what this person's using the money for. We flagged it now in 3 different settings over 2 years. This is a cause for concern. So having an internal protocol like that would be an immediate thing that I would do as state auditor, and that's an tangible thing that helps people immediately. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Willie Orr. For both of you, could you be more specific about criteria for targeting guardianships for detailed audits? Zach, would you detail an example of a case you brought in your job as ombudsman? And
we start with Zach.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so a case for my end, I want to make sure that I covered the objective sides of the cases. I can't go into the personal details without compromising patient confidentiality with the state ombudsman. We're required by federal law in the Older Americans Act to not disclose specific data information related to the client or the patient in this matter. So objective cases that I've seen and worked on, issues where we saw somebody that was charged for a COVID-19 fee and moved simply from one room to another without having any COVID positive test at all. Pure sign of being billed for services that aren't rendered, and overcharging them, right, for medication in different circumstances, or overcharging them for services on the ground that would typically cost a set rate, but now magically have gone up for $400, $600, $800. Working with the families to gather their financial records and see those bills in real time and say, okay, there's not only a serious pattern and practice of behavior here of fraud, but also we need to intervene. We need to help this person now. So that's a specific example that I've used where I've built in the elements of fraud, investigated, and helped relieve that person for dignity and access to justice while investigating staff at the same time. That's another huge part of this job, and that's where I bring strong experience. I'm the only candidate who has actively investigated people.
Okay.
Thank you.
Time.
Okay, do you want me to keep reading them?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, here's a question from Bob Mang. Former state auditor.
Do I get to answer that one, or?
Oh, I'm sorry, you didn't answer it? Oh, I'm sorry, Joe. My bad. Go ahead.
It's okay. So more specifics on targeting audits of guardianships. Well, first of all, the state auditor is a formal member of this working interdisciplinary network of guardian stakeholders. The acronym is WINGS, and it has members of the judiciary And this is something that I think we should do for other big programs. What this Wings group does is they talk about how the framework of protections for guardianships is working. How is the financial reporting working? Does the state auditor have any issues with any particular reports that are, well, all of them are submitted to the state auditor for his discretionary audit. And so I would, that's one of the best ways to target problematic guardianships is through this intergovernmental working group. And I applaud the legislature for doing this. And they just refined the protections for guardianships. They just passed a
2
law
seconds, Joe.
that really prevents of any initial sale of assets from a guardianship. And I attended a guardianship hearing for my aunt, and it was heartbreaking to see her consider hiring contractual providers instead of her grandson. And so this is really what it takes, is somebody who understands the human side of guardianships as well.
Time. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I want to apologize to both of you. I think it's kind of distracting for you to have me suddenly go 30 seconds, but we've used the old putting up a sign and somebody doesn't, you don't
If
see
you're
it
not looking
until
at the
it's,
screen, you
you're
don't
not
see
looking
it.
at the screen, you don't see it, and then you see 30 seconds and you've got about 3 seconds left.
Oh,
So,
I'm sure people have interrupted them in their lives on several occasions.
just being polite.
I know. Okay. All right. The next question is from Bob May. Former state auditor Tim Keller conducted a leakage audit of state, municipal, and public school procurement of products and services. It revealed a significant amount of public dollars that were being spent out of state, highlighting local economic development opportunities. What priority would keeping this kind of audit up to date, or what priority would you give this kind of audit if you were state auditor?
So that's
And
Joe
Joe
first, and I'll
first,
try
yeah.
not to forget Zach.
Mhm.
Well, I think, leakage, being a former mayor, I'm always concerned about, the erosion of a tax base, I think, in any community. And cities are heavily reliant on gross receipts taxes. So I think this is an important topic. I'm not familiar with the specific study, but what I would do is to see what, if any, changes were made to prevent this from happening. Department of Finance and Administration, they're the ones that review all the procurements from state agencies. That's been my experience at the Public Regulation Commission. And so if there are still lingering problems with this leakage study in terms of procurements, I would work with the legislature and say, hey, is there any way we can prioritize in-state providers, vendors of materials, and even services. And so I would see if there's any kind of initiatives that we can work in terms of Buy New Mexico. I know that there is an emphasis on contractors, for example, in our community solar rule, where we're gonna favor in-state solar contractors. So there's a lot that can be done in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. And sorry, Paul thought we were unmuted and we weren't, so we got in a little late there. Okay, Zach.
Zach,
There you go. Can you all hear me now? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. So great question. I'm very excited to answer this, Bob. So I am familiar with this report, and it's really important related to the functions and duties of this office. I will say again, it is really important that we have the best possible candidate that understands the full statutory responsibilities of this office. And that's what I'm bringing to you, and that's why I'm trusted statewide. So what Mayor Tim Keller did when he was then State Auditor Tim Keller was be able to identify all these outgoing expenses that could have stayed here in New Mexico. It was called money that was on the sidelines and money that's on the table. And it was a fantastic report and an annual review that he was able to offer for all state contracts. I am adopting that same model and inspired by then Auditor Keller to be able to continue that and be able to work with the Office of Government Accountability on day one to do that. They are already equipped to do that, and they do that in some function already with overall state contracts. But here's what I'm adding to it as well, Bob. I'm making sure that we look at our overall state spending out of state and find vendors here in New Mexico that could service the same jobs and be able to connect
30
them
seconds.
with an open and transparent bidding process, of course. The second piece is making sure our state dollars aren't furthering hate, wage gaps, or gender discrimination at all by keeping them away from companies, keeping state dollars away from companies that engage in that behavior, or keeping our state dollars away from the fossil fuel industry that is perpetuating the climate cycle that we already are experiencing. So making sure that we have ethical investments with our money, making sure that we have ethical spending with our state dollars is not only a part of my campaign platform, it's my plan. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, next question is from Francis Gonzalez.
So we'll start with Zach.
For both candidates, school boards in rural areas are passing their budget audits and have years of multiple infractions. When a complaint comes in, how will you address it? And it says, I think she's saying it hasn't been done before.
You're up first, Zach.
Yes.
Okay, great. Just making sure. So the school board issues that come in. So how I will address it if elected and trusted as state auditor, I will be able to look at it through two lenses. The first is if it has a history of non-compliance, which in this scenario it does. So that already flags it for me as a high priority. The second is working with the staff and interviewing them and being able to see what the structural deficiencies have been to create that non-compliance. And what I will do is have not only a rolling audit in place where I make an unannounced visit every so often, could be once a month, or it could be once every calendar year, or once by the statutory requirement for the state auditor's office. To make sure that these schools know that we're serious and that we want to not only help them, but we will hold them accountable when it comes to the safety of our students and managing our public funds. That's what I'm promising you. And also making sure that state and federal tracker is in place so we can see in real time if misappropriation is happening. That's going to be such a powerful tool on the digital side, but also
30
in
seconds,
practice in real life. So that's what I'm offering there, Francis. And it's also personal to me. My mom's a public school teacher and my dad's a plumber. I grew up in a family of nurses, educators, and firefighters. So making sure public resources are well spent in our school districts. I'm a proud product of New Mexico Public Schools. So this is really important to me. All the way to higher education too.
Thank you. Joe?
Thank you, Francis, for the question. I too come from a family of public school teachers. My father was a math and science teacher. In fact, I had him for 7th grade math and science. He assigns desks, and guess where my desk was? It was right in the front. And my sister also was a public school teacher. She was a special ed teacher. And so the emphasis on education is very, very important. And we've seen, especially during this pandemic, how distance learning has really set our kids back. And that's why we need to redouble our focus on education spending through these audits of these school boards. In fact, I would revisit the template, the contract that all these independent public auditors have to use in conducting audit. Obviously, it's got to be a standard template, but there's a different protocol. If the state auditor encounters any problems with problematic school boards, he has to inform the education secretary. The auditor has to inform the education secretary. So if there's a special protocol at that level, then there should be a unique procedure that's unique to school districts and auditing a school district. And obviously, as my opponent said, I think there are red flags in these audits, and I think the next state auditor has to really move on those. And so that's what I would do. I'd be proactive and very quick and work with them to ensure it doesn't happen again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Linda Pafford. The auditor's office can tackle much more than finances and has a few currently in process, I guess, projects. Are you aware of the current project list, and what would you add?
That starts with Joe.
Go back to Joe, yes.
Well, the state auditor, as I mentioned, has a very, very small staff. And we at the PRC, we're trying to get more budget to implement these legislative mandates. We asked for 14%, they only gave us 7%. in one of the best years in the history of revenues here at the state. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, but I agree that there needs to be additional resources to expand the staff to go beyond just looking at finances. There's other types of audits besides financial audits that can be conducted. There's performance audits. There's a lot of different other types of audits that can be conducted other than financial. But I want to make sure that you don't overextend this office and start creating all these special offices. And all it's going to do is dilute the core mission of the office, and that is to root out fraud, waste, and abuse. And so we have to be very careful about expanding the scope of the office. But as I mentioned, I definitely want to expand the investigatory authority and the independence and convert the Government Accountability Office to more like the federal GAO. And so there's many things that we can do to kind of help the vulnerable, as I mentioned, children, youth, and families. I think there's been a lot of irregularities that require special attention, and I certainly will do that as the next state auditor. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Joe. Zach?
Great. So the answer is yes, it can do so much more than state finances without expanding its scope. And its scope is a legal term of art. So we're not expanding the scope. We're actually using the authority that we have constitutionally appropriated to us, statutorily appropriated to us in this office. When I talk about auditing the fossil fuel industry and holding the healthcare industry accountable for predatory acts against our seniors, adults with disabilities, and veterans, that's not expanding the scope. It's actually doing the work that the auditor's office is allowed to do under state law and has the resources to do now as well, and is being able to equip to work with. And I've talked to the last 3 state auditors and they all agree with me on that. So that's point one. Point two, the finance projects outside of what the state auditor's office has focused on, it also is focused on audits that focus on the Americans with Disabilities Act and compliance for public buildings and entities that use state dollars or county dollars or local dollars to make sure that accessibility is available and that
30 seconds, Zach.
So it does have a foundation in place right now to do more than just finances. And it's doing that right now with ADA audits and equity audits in different forms for the education system. So.
Okay,
Time.
thank you, Zach. So next question is from Sarah Hume. I mean, I think you may have already covered this ground, but I'll ask it. And if you have anything to add, go ahead. How does your experience differentiate you from that of your opponent? What makes you the better choice?
Start with
Zach.
Yeah, so I want to first start by saying, this race is not about tearing each other down. It's about building our party up and having the strongest possible ticket. So I don't have any ill will or intention to cast my opponent in a negative light. I'm just going to go with my objective background and my ideas. So here's where I bring strong background. I am professionally trained in law, investigations, and in economics. I have applied that at the height of our most serious situation faced in the state's history. Serving as the federal ombudsman, investigating abuse, neglect, and exploitation, investigating employees of both the public and private sectors for fraud, abuse, and neglect, holding actors accountable on both sides, and being able to be an impartial and neutral actor in doing so. I bring that strong experience as well as trust, having the trust of statewide labor unions, being the only candidate that is endorsed by labor unions because of my ideas. Go ahead, Paul.
30 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, we're getting used to it now. The second piece is making sure that we have a statewide coalition of trust as well to strengthen the ticket. That's where I bring strong background and experience in. Also, politically, there's a reason why people are trusting me and supporting me and endorsing my campaign. And it's because of my battle-tested experience. It's because of the vision I have to make sure we protect our most vulnerable and unite our state. And it's because we're running a positive campaign.
Okay, time.
Thank you. Joe.
So, the experience that I think sets me apart is I have the experience really to hit the ground running. I'm not gonna sit here and say that I worked in this position for a few months and that I'm battle tested. I'm gonna be truthful with you, and everything that I've ever done as an elected official is a matter of public record. Minutes have been taken. And so it's my professional experience. It's my experience as an elected official that sets me apart. You know, I'm the only one that's ever made decisions that affect a constituency. The only one in this campaign that's done that. I'm the only one that has real leadership experience. I've led organizations like the New Mexico Municipal League. It represents all cities, towns, and villages. I was their president. I was chairman of New Mexico Voices for Children because I care about kids. I'm a parent. And we know that New Mexico has a lot of needs
30
in terms of its families. And so I think it's really that experience that I've had, in professional experience, battle tested, standing up to entrenched special interests, ensuring on accountability in certain cases of even of my own government that I represent. And so that's what I bring. I bring proven leadership to the table. Thank you.
Time.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Well, we're probably not going to be able to answer all of our questions, but we can probably get a couple more in. This next one is from Alyssa Kenny Geyer, who we just met the other day. She's a former Oregon legislator, and she's talking about the Secretary of State in Oregon conducts state audits and released a report yesterday on the ineffective, inequitable policy of mortgage interest deductions, which primarily benefits high-income people. And that the Secretary of State there recommended policies to reform that to be more equitable and effective. So do you have an interest in expanding the auditor's office beyond, quote, fraud, abuse, and neglect to examine the effectiveness and equity of the state's tax policies to ensure that our dollars are being used optimally?
I've lost track.
And I think it's Joe. Joe first.
Oh, that's a pretty specific question. Well, you know, one thing that I would do as your next state auditor is I would consolidate all the audits of state agencies. We're one of the few states that should do that, but we don't do that. Why? Because in certain instances, and I've talked to other folks in state government right now, there was an instance where two agencies, separate state agencies, were managing the same pot of federal funds for different purposes, but in their audits, it didn't reconcile. And so I'm going to ensure that we do that. There's a practice that's been going on for quite a while where auditors actually develop the financial statements, the very financial statements of the entity that they're required to audit. And that practice needs to end. The public entity has to develop its own financial statements. In terms of looking at some of these issues, you know, our tax policy, it's a Swiss cheese tax policy here in New Mexico. There's over 300 tax exemptions. And so you could have fraternal groups coming in the front door, fraternal groups coming in the front door of the legislature, and, you know, religious-based organizations coming in the back door. And it's not fair. It's only because, you know, certain entities that are exempt from taxation have been successful in lobbying the state legislature. And so if we're going to talk about taxes, we're in dire need of tax reform, because I don't think that our tax system is fair. The whole issue of taxation of Social Security benefits, I think, is another issue. So that's a very good topic, and I think it's doable. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Zach.
Great. Thank you, Roxanne. Thank you, Paul. So direct answer to the question. Yes, I do have an interest and have a plan to make sure that we expand the focus of this office within our legal scope to include more than just fraud, abuse, and neglect. It's looking at equity. I'm the only candidate with an equity audit plan. And that equity audit plan looks at the way that our state, county, and local government entities spend our taxpayer money and see if they align with the actual missions of those projects and programs, as well as the historic injustices done to communities of color, and whether or not we're furthering issues of racism, gender discrimination, or hate. Making sure that we ethically use our money as government is going to be essential. And that's our platform as both progressives and Democrats, and making sure that we are able to have a united voice about where we stand in the role and function of government, which is to protect our people and make sure that true and lasting equity is a foundation everybody can thrive from. This office can do that. It can tell more than just bad stories. It can actually be able to show what is working.
30 seconds.
In this office, what is the best functions of state funds or county funds, who's having a breakthrough idea in Mora County or Hidalgo right now with the way that they're doing housing, who's having a breakthrough idea with the way they're using public funds for infrastructure or for equity programs for our schools. I will be able to highlight that, and I am committed to doing that. That's why I have a plan designated for it, because it's important to me and I know our values.
Thank you, Zach. So we only have 2 questions left, so I think we should try to get to both of them, and then everybody will have had their question answered. And so even if we need to go over like a minute or so, or maybe you can just try to take 1 minute to answer the last 2. I know it's not very much time, and I want to respect everyone's time and try not to go over too much. So next to the last question is Rosella or Rosella, I'm not sure, Rosella Gonzalez. Mr. Quintero differentiated between financial and performance audits. Please speak to what might trigger a performance audit and provide examples of state agencies and private contractors' performance audit variables. And we'll start with you, Zach.
Of course, yeah, this is a great technical question. So performance audit looks at 2 core pieces. The first is how an employee is exercising their review over public money. It can be an employee performance audit, or it can be a performance audit of how those funds are used in real time, if they're ending up from point A to point B. So it's a financial performance audit and a labor force performance audit. Those are the 2 kind of worlds of performance audit. That's the first part. So what I would apply it to, perfect example, the Albuquerque public school system and the lack of internal controls. Looking at a performance audit from the administration that oversaw those funds and seeing how staff was trained with internal controls, what was the standard practice and procedure they used to flag and identify funds, and why did it take 11 years? Why didn't we have a cyber audit to catch these systems within the accounting system to begin with? That's not only a performance audit, that's just a standard practice that I would include in our investigation practices. That's the other piece. The state auditor's office can create internal rules
30 seconds,
for investigation practices, for the investigation practices that govern the way we look into audits. That includes our tactics. And that's where it's going to be essential to have someone with strong investigative background. And that's what I bring to this race.
Thank you, Zach. Joe?
Yeah, well, a financial audit is probably the most, traditional audit that the state auditor has to oversee. The state auditor has to oversee almost 1,000 annual fiscal year audits. And there are special audits that are done of state agencies, depending on any red flags that may come out of that state agency audit. The way I see a performance audit is it's really meant to be more internal for the benefit of that particular entity. It's much more targeted to a certain area. It could be targeted to public works. It could be targeted to certain areas, and it's really kind of meant to improve the implementation of specific programs within a public entity. So I see the performance audit as more constructive and targeted, whereas the financial audit is much more comprehensive and much more serious. So that's the way I see the two audits, the differences.
30 seconds. Well, you managed to do that. Oh, that's right. We're trying to do it.
Thank you, Joe. It's okay.
In a minute. I was trying to stay to a minute.
All right. I know we're at 8 o'clock. Everybody, if you can just hang in there, and we'll get the last
This is a
question
good question.
answered. And this is from Sally Rogers. Do you see a role for the state auditor in the current appointment of, I guess this is an example, the current appointment of an Exxon employee to the State Game Commission in the slot that was designated for someone from the environmental community? The appointee is also a contributor to the governor's campaign. So is there a role for the state auditor in conflict of interest situations in boards and commissions appointments? And we'll start with you, Joe.
Well, that's a really specific, role. I don't know that the auditor can actually get involved in influencing an appointee in another independent board or commission. But that could be maybe if there are ethical questions about the prospective appointee. I think that maybe this is an issue for the ethics commission. I would probably say no. There's probably not a role for the state auditor in this that I can think of. Thank you for the question, Sally.
Thank you for the answer. My phone died, so I didn't have a timer going.
That's
Roxanne
okay.
just started one.
Okay. Back to you, Zach.
All right, we got it in our mind now, Paul and Roxanne, so we're good to go. We have an automatic clock. So the answer is yes. There is a legal function that is triggered in these circumstances. Now, the question is, what kind of overlapping facts do we have outside of what we just saw right now, which is we have a contributor to the executive, that person being appointed to a specific board. There's a larger question there that could be able to be looked at. Is it a specific financial position where they're going to be handling state finances or voting on specific projects? Do they have a company that has active financial contracts with the state? Do they have stock in a company that has active financial contracts with the state? All of those are huge ethical dilemmas that could be able to be disqualifying for a lot of people. And that actually does trigger the abuse of public funds function of the state auditor's office. And I will say again, ladies and gentlemen, it is essential, absolutely essential, that we have someone in this role that understands the statutory responsibilities they are tasked with. So it's not only just about being able to focus on the problem, it's knowing the authority you have to be able to solve the problem and having that experience of solving it. That's where I'm coming in right here. The authority that I've brought before is being able to look at the conflicts and say, okay, this might be a potential fraud issue. We got to flag it. We got to help this person out.
That's time.
So that's the answer.
Thanks. We didn't give you very much of a warning there. Sorry about that. Okay, thanks for hanging in there, everybody. We're pretty much done, but we're going to give each of the candidates 1 minute to say anything they want to say about themselves that they may have forgotten, or anything they want to emphasize, or just to wrap it up.
And if they wind up speaking really fast, it might be because we told them they had 4 minutes at the close.
But we kind of ran out of time, so I hope that's okay. So let's go back. Oh, I thought we'd go back to Zach.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Right. Okay, Zach, and then Joe. 1 minute, and if you go a few seconds over, it's okay.
Okay, I'll actually keep it very short. I know everybody's been very patient today and listening to such a detailed conversation. I just want to say thank you so much again for hosting tonight. It's been a fantastic forum, being able to show our core functions of the office while also sharing our ideas and sharing with you what makes us not only qualified, but focused to do this job and be able to protect people. That's what this office is about. It's about protecting our people, safeguarding our state finances. Those two main functions are this office. That's what I'm bringing to you respectfully. Again, I'm not interested in tearing anybody down. I'm interested in building our state up. This is about a very serious position, and I've been trusted to do very serious work during probably one of our most serious situations in the last 85 years as a state. And not only that, I've been trained and trusted to do this work before. The clients that I had to work with, ranging from law to economic situations, from family poverty to taking on the oil and gas industry through administrative law hearings as a student, and then later representing folks within an administrative law context as the federal ombudsman by protecting their civil rights and their health care and making sure they weren't being exploited. All of that is incredibly relevant experience in this position. Thank you so much. My name is Zach Quintero. I hope to earn your trust and support. Take care.
Sorry, we didn't give you a warning there. Okay, Joe.
Well, thank you, Roxanne and Paul, for hosting this this forum. You know, one thing that I did too, you got glimpses of what I was up against as a counselor facing a corrupt administration. So what I did is I decided to recruit newcomers to run for office in Espanola, and I did that, recruited progressive newcomers with gender balance. We ended up basically voting all the incumbents out. And we established the first female majority in the history of the city. And that's the kind of commitment that I have for honest and transparent government. And I'm the only candidate that really has the experience and the leadership and experience in decision making. And in fact, right now we're making important decisions on the commission. I started off representing 2,500 people. Now I'm representing over 400,000 constituents. So if you value proven leadership and experience, I'm your candidate, and I hope to have your vote and your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone who was with us tonight. Thank you, Zach Quintero. Thank you, Joseph Maestas. Good luck to both of you. And have a good night, everybody.
Our audience in making their choice in June. And
It's,
good luck to both of you guys.
it's not going to be easy. Yeah.
Thank
Two
you.
fabulous
Some
candidates.
very nice comments in the chat about how good a discussion this was and what good candidates we've got. So,
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Paul.
all
All
right.
right. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Good night.